Today's daf is daf Nun, and we got up to Ella Omar of Yosef, Mehocha. So before we read the Gemara inside, let's just review. We have a statement, a principle formulated by Rava of Dvarim Shebelev Einam Dvarim. In the case where a person sold his real estate under the assumption that he's making Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, and at the end his plans fall through. He wants to cancel the sale, and Rava paskins that the sale is valid. Excuse me. And he cannot invalidate the sale. The Gemara tried to derive Rava's conclusion from the halacha that we force a person to be makriv a carbon, even though he refuses, because we beat him up until he says roadside me. And even though in his heart he doesn't want to bring the carbon, nevertheless, and therefore the carbon is valid. The Gemara rejects that proof because it could be that a person really wants the kapar of the carbon. So deep down, he does want the carbon. The Gemara tried another approach to derive Rava's conclusion from a get or shichur avodim, where we force a person, if he's halachically bound to deliver the get when he says roadside me, and that validates the get or the shtar shichur. And even though we know that we had to force him and coerce him because he wasn't interested in giving the get, and we should derive from here the conclusion of Rava that dvarim shebelev lavi dvarim. And once again, the Gemara says the same logic. There's no proof from there because mitzvah l'shmo l'divrei chacham, he really intends to give the get. Ella Omer of Yosef mehacha. So we are now on daf Nun Omer Aleph, the third of the wide lines down. Here's where we're going to prove from a Mishnah later on Daf Samach Beis that Dvarim Shebelev Lo Avi Dvarim. HaMakadish Es HaIsha, the Omar, after the Kiddushin, the Makadish makes the following claim. Kasavar Ayisi, those are the two key words here, Kasavar Ayisi, Shehi Kohenes. I was of the misimpression that she was a Bas Kohen. Varehi Levia. As it turns out, she's the daughter of a Levi. Or the reverse. He comes and he says after the Kiddushin, Levia, I thought I was marrying a Bas Levi. Vinim says Kohenes. And it turns out she's a Bas Kohen. Ania, I thought she was a poor girl. Varehi Ashira. Or the reverse, Ashira Varehi Ania. And in all these cases, even though he's claiming that he was under the misimpression when he married her, Mikudeshes, the Kiddushin are valid and binding. She cannot get married to anyone without a get. Because she didn't say to him, I am this, I am that, and mislead him. So the Gemara asks, V'hamai, after all, he's claiming that he married her under false premises. Why is the Kiddushin valid? Ella, we must conclude, Mishum Damrin Dvarim Shebelev Einam Dvarim. He didn't make an explicit condition at the time of the marriage. He married her with what we call stam, without any qualification. And what he has in his heart, he thought this, he thought that, is not binding. And the Gemara rejects this as well. Abai says to Rav Yosef, Dilma Shani Hasam Dila Chumra. When we require a get in order to allow her to marry someone else, that's only L'chumra. It's very possible that if the Makadish would be believed that in his heart he anticipated a Kohenes and he got a Levi instead, an Ashira and he got an Aniyah instead, then the Kiddushin would be invalid. And maybe Dvarim Shebelev Havi Dvarim. However, L'chumra, we're going to paskin that maybe we can't rely on what he claims he had in his heart, and therefore remains a suffix. Now, if it's a suffix, then number one, she can't marry anyone without a get. And number two, if she went ahead and she got married to a second person, it's not enough that she would receive a get from her second Makadish, she would need a get from her first Makadish. Basically, virtually from both. So Abaye is arguing against Rav Yosef, you've got to give me a proof that Dvarim Shebelev Lo Avi Dvarim, even Lekula. And therefore, Ela Omer Abaye Mehacha. Let's prove it and establish the principle of Rava from our Mishnah. What does it say in our Mishnah? Bekulam, in all the cases, the various scenarios of toes that are enumerated in our Mishnah, for example, he thought that he was Makadish or Aldas, that he's a Kohen, and it turns out that he's a Levi. Afal Pisha Omra, it would seem from the Mishnah that even if she claims Belibi Hoilis Kaddish Lo, Afal Pichem, even though he turns out to be a Levi, I had in mind to marry him, whether he's a Kohen or a Levi. And nevertheless, Eina Mekudeshes, the Mishnah says that since he stipulated that he was a Kohen, and in fact, in truth, he was not a Kohen, the Kiddushin is not valid. And therefore, she could get married without a get. And that's Lakula. V'amai hakomer b'libi hoya. She's claiming that she wanted to marry him, mikol makom, even if he's not a Kohen, even if he's a Levi. So we must conclude, argues Abaye, that Dvarim Shebelev Lo Avi Dvarim, that the Kiddushin is not worth a dime. It doesn't even get off the ground. It's not even a suffix Kiddushin to require her to have a get, because Dvarim Shebelev, even though she says she wanted to marry him, it's Dvarim Shebelev, because as far as what we saw, he said he was a Kohen, and in fact he's not a Kohen, and the Kiddushin therefore is invalid, because the basic condition that was built into the Kiddushin was not fulfilled. The Rashba says, maybe the pshat is that we don't believe her because she didn't say anything. How do we know that she's telling the truth? So the Rashba points out, well, okay, we don't know for sure that she's telling the truth and she really wanted to marry him, mikol makom, even if he's a Levi, but nevertheless, it should at least be a suffix Kiddushin. The Makna, one of the Achronim, he says no, that our Gemara is talking about a case where she indicated before the Kiddushin that she's not Makbid. And she doesn't care what he says at the time of Kiddushin. She wants to marry him in any event. The Gemara rejects Abaye's proof. Dilma Shani Hasam, the cave of the Asni Lav, the Akri Tanoi. There was a Tanai that was established, namely, he said, the Baal, the Makadesh, that Makadesh Yuel Manas Shani Kohen, and she heard his condition. She didn't say, well, you know what, forget about the Tanai. I'm interested in marrying you, even if you're not a Kohen. And therefore, even though Dvarim Shebelev, Havi Dvarim, but that's not powerful enough to be Oker, a Tanai in Kiddushin. The Kiddushin was set up on a condition. That condition was not fulfilled. Therefore, the Kiddushin is not valid. The fact that she comes along and says, well, Dvarim Shebelev, yeah, okay, Dvarim Shebelev Havi Dvarim, but not when it comes as a conflict to undermine the Tanai in the Kiddushin. Ella Amar Rav Chia bar Ovin, Uvda Havi Bei Rav Chizda. He's going to tell a story, and from this story, we're going to figure out how to derive and prove Rava's conclusion that Dvarim Shebelev Lo Havi Dvarim. Rav Chizda Bei Rav Huna. Rav Chizda took this question to the Beis Medrash of Rav Huna in a case of a person who sold all his real estate under the assumption that he was moving, and at the end he couldn't move. upashte. And when Rav Chizda got an answer from Rav Huna, the final answer was that Dvarim Shebelev Einam Dvarim. And how did Rav Huna prove that Dvarim Shebelev Lavi Dvarim? From a Mishnah in Masechet Me'ila Daf Chaf Aleph. Now Me'ila is an Isur that, number one, generates a Chiyuv Chomesh. So you have to pay Hegdesh Keren v'chomesh, and you have to bring a korban me'ila. And there is shlichus in the Isur of me'ila, as we learned back on Daf Mem Beis. So Omer l'shlucho, he sends his shliach, Havili, bring me a bag of coins, minachalon, from that window, omenat luskima, or from this large sack. And the shliach was commissioned to take that money and spend it out in the market, which is exactly what he did. Ve'viulo, and the shliach brings back to the mishaleach exactly what he was asked to buy, and therefore there's an Isur Me'ila. The Baal Bais now claims, you know what? I'm not chayav from Me'ila. My kavanah was not that he take from this particular wallet, which is Hegdesh, but rather from a different wallet or from a different window. And halacha is Kevin Shehevi lo mizeh Baal Bais mal. When the shliach brings the object that he purchased with the most from this arnik, even though the Baal Bais is saying, I didn't send you to that arnik, I meant to send you to a different arnik, Baal Bais mal. The shlichus is valid, and as we said before, the shlichus in Me'ila, the Baal Bais now is chayav midin Me'ila. He has to add a chomesh, and he has to bring a korban Me'ila. The shliach fulfilled the shlichus of the Baal Bais. Vamai. So Rav Huna asks the following question: Haka'amar belibi. He is claiming that in my heart, what I wanted him was not to go to that arnik of Hegdish, but to a different arnik that has chulin in it. Elalav, we have no choice but to assume mishum de'amrin dvarim shebelev einam dvarim. That which he says, well, I didn't mean to send them here, but I meant to send them there. That's dvarim shebelev. The halacha is determined only by mashe motzi adam mipiv. And once again, the Gemara rejects this proof. Vidilma shani hasan dilan miftar nafshi bikarban kasi. Maybe he's lying when he says, I meant to send him to a different wallet. And we're going to be choshesh that he's lying in order to pater himself up from a korban meila. So we don't rely on his claim of belief, but in general, if we would have reason to give him nemanos that he had in mind something else, then dvarim shebelev havi dvarim. You can't prove from here that dvarim shebelev lavi dvarim. So now the Gemara is going to analyze: do we really suspect that he's lying? Havi leilabema meisedav. He has an easy way out if he wants to exempt himself from being the korban. All he has to do is say that I was amazed. I knew very well that the mos in this arniki are moshel hegdesh, and I deliberately sent the shliach to take the moshel hegdesh and spend them in the shuk, and therefore we suspect we should not suspect that he's lying to try to wiggle himself out of a chiyuv karma, because if he really was lying and he wanted to exempt himself from a chiyuv carbon, he could have easily done so by saying Mezira. You see, what's his name? That's not a real migu. It's not comfortable for a person to say Mezira Yisi lo ovid inish the mashvi nafshi rishia. A person is not darko to make himself into a rasha. Therefore, he would rather claim, in order to wiggle his way out of the carbon, that he never intended that the shliach should take it from this arniki, which has in it most from hegdesh. So therefore, we don't believe him based on the fact that he could have said Mezid Hayisi, because lo avid inish lamashre nafshi rishai. But now the Gemara is asking, well, you know what? We should believe him. And therefore we can prove that Dvarim Shebelev Einam Dvarim. Why should we believe him? Havi leila moment is karti. He could wiggle his way out of the carbon without making himself into a Russia with a very comfortable argument. He could have just said that after he appointed and commissioned the shliach to be motzi the mos, he reminded himself, oh no, those mos are hegdish. And that was before the shliach had the opportunity to use these mos to buy something, purchase something in the shuk. This Sanya, we learned in a brisa, if after the balabais appoints a shliach nizkar balabais, he reminds himself that the mos are hegdesh, and that's before the shliach got a chance to purchase anything and use these mos. Lo nizkar shliach is shliach mo. The shliach is the shogeg and not the balabais, because the balabais is no longer in violation of me'ilah, because before the shliach fulfilled the shlichus, he realized that these are mos of hegdesh. And the reason for this is that in Kol HaTorah Kula, Ein Shliach L'Dvar Avera, and it's considered as if the Shliach did the Avera. We had a derivation back on Daf Mem Beis that in Me'ilah there is Shlichus L'Dvar Avera, but Pamedvar Mamurim, that's only when the Mishalech was a Shogeg. If the Mishalech turns out to be, at the moment of the violation of Me'ilah, amazing, he's not a Shogeg B'Shas Me'ilah, then he cannot bring the carbon. And since he cannot bring the carbon, the shliach now becomes the perpetrator of the Maisa Me'ilah, and he did it b'shogeg, and therefore the shliach has to bring the carbon Me'ilah, etc., etc. So what conclusion do we derive from this sugya of Me'ilah? The Mishaleach, the Balabayas, could have potted himself up from a carbon with a tine in his karti. Therefore, we should believe him that Lohaya Belibi. I didn't intend for him to take from this anarchy, but from another anarchy. And yet, the Mishnah Me'ilah establishes that he's not potter. He, the Balabayas, is chayav. And we can prove from this that Dvarim Shabalev and Dvarim. And this is the final conclusion to support Rav. The Gemara tells a story. He indicated before the Mechira that his intention was to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Solik, he went on Aliyah after he sold all his real estate, v'lo itarle, but it didn't work out for him. His yishuv or dira in Eretz Yisrael was not successful, and therefore he went back to Chutz La'aretz. Now, his intention is to vitiate the Mechira. Omar Rava called the Salak Adaitu L'Me'edahu v'lo itarle. What his intention was not just to step off the plane, the El Al plane in Ben Gurion Airport, but rather to settle in Eretz Yisrael. Otherwise, he needs his real estate back in Chutz La'aretz because he has to go back to Chutz La'aretz. So therefore, the Mechira is bottom. Ika Diamri. There's a second version of Rava's statement. No, the Mechira is not B'Tela. Adaitila Mesa. What he indicated was that my intention is to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Vasalikla, he did make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. He got himself a Tudat Zahud when he landed in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, we're not going to relate to the fact that his Aliyah was Lo Ola Biyado, to be Dar Be'eretz Yisrael. And here, there's a very important footnote. And he says, what did he say B'Shas Mechira? He said, I'm selling you this Aldas Lalos. He didn't say, I'm selling you Aldas Ladur B'Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, we don't assume anything beyond what he was Motzi Mipiv. That's according to the Ika Diamri. Another story. Who He explicitly mentioned at the time of the Mechira that my intention is to make Aliyah. And at the end, things like he changed his mind. And now he wants to get out of the Mechira and vitiate the contract. Omer Avashi, he doesn't have a right to do that. He buys solid. No one is preventing him from fulfilling this original desire of his to go to Eretz Yisrael. He can't be mevatel the mechira. Ika diamri, another slightly different version of Avashi's statement. Iboy lo solid. If he wanted to, could he not go on Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael? And therefore the mechira is not betela. Fekta Gemara might be nayu. In both Lishonos of Rav Ashi, the mechira is not betela, because he has the potential and the ability to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. So what's the difference between two Lishonos? The Gemara now wants to interpret the two Lishonos of Rav Ashi in the following way. What about a situation in which it would be difficult for him to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael? There are what we call ikuvim. There are barriers that inhibit his ability to go on Aliyah, meaning that there are listim in the derech. He can't make Aliyah unless he joins a shiara, some sort of security patrol, to make Aliyah. And it would cost him more money, it's more tircha. So according to the first version of Ravashi, he still has the ability to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Again, it would cost him more, and it's more of a tircha. He's got to go with a shayara because he has to protect himself from the bears and the listim. And therefore, he cannot be mevatel the mechira. But according to the second version, where Rav Ashi says v'chilo yochel hulalos, he says eina mechira ke'emes el kasher yochel lalos bekalus lelo shum ma'akev. What he meant to say that if it's going to be easy to go on Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, then I want this mechira to be chal. But now that it turns out that it's very difficult and challenging with barriers and impediments that he has to overcome, therefore he could be mevatel the mechira. And this leads us to the Mishnah on Daf Nun. Now we'll soon see that there are two Mishnayos, actually three Mishnayos here on the bottom of Daf Nun. The first of which addresses the case of a Omer l'shulchot seva kaddish l'isha plonus v'makom ploni. He says, I want you to marry her there, in that specific location. Holach the shliach went ahead, v'kidsh makom acher, and he was mekadosh in a different location. Eina mekudeshes. The Mishalech was makpid that the shliach be mekadosh in that particular place, and we'll see how the Gemara explains why. However, if the mekadosh says to the shliach, harei he b'makom ploni, meaning nimtzeis b'makom ploni, not that you should marry her there, but that's where you'll find her. The kiddush makom acher, and he found her elsewhere, and he was mekadosh on behalf of the mekadosh, the mishalech. I raised the mekudeshes. There, the mishalech, the baal, the mekadosh was not makbid. The Gemara says with Tanan Nami Gabi Gittin, we have almost an identical Mishnah in Masechet Gittin Samachet. And why do we need two Mishnayos? Ha Omer Tnu Get Li Ishti. Get Zeli Ishti b'makom ploni, v'nasno lo b'makom acher pos. But if he says Harei he b'makom ploni, that's where you'll find him. V'nasno lo b'makom acher kosher utzrich, and I need both Mishnayos. Te'i ashmein on Gabi Kiddushin. If I only had the Mishnah here in Masechet Kiddushin, I would have said that the reason why he's mocked it when he says b'makom ploni is b'makom delekur v'kasi. In that place, he has relatives and friends, and b'hayasra rachmuli v'lamamali mili iloi, that no one is going to get away with speaking divrei gnai about me, because my relatives and friends who are ahuvim, they will defend me, and they will dispel any lashon hara about me. But in another place, sanuli mamali mili loy, there are oivim who will try to dissuade this woman from marrying me. They'll say bad things about me, and I have no one to defend myself. But in the case of a get where he's terminating the marriage, Amar, there's room to say, lo ichpasle, he doesn't care which place he finds, the shliach finds the isha and he's megarish. And if on the other hand, I only had the Mishnah in Masechet Gittin, I would say that only in the case of a megarish, where there's a gnai to divorce your wife, here in that place, I don't care if they embarrass me about the fact that I divorced my wife, but there are other places where I'm very makpin on my bizayon, and therefore the shliach has to be megarisha in that particular place that he sent it to. Kiddushin, in the case of Kiddushin, which is not a gnai, I might entertain the idea that he's not really makpid tzricha, and therefore I need a Mishnah to tell me that he is makpid. And now we get to the next Mishnah. This is a case of a man who marries a woman on the condition that she doesn't have neither nidarim, or another scenario, she doesn't have mumin, physical blemishes. In other words, he made a condition that she didn't take upon herself isurim, which are called nidre inui nefesh, and it turns out that she did take those nidarim. And Eina Baal Mefer B'Kodmin, and therefore these Nidarim are valid. The Kiddushin is completely invalid. She can marry anyone without a get. However, Konsa Stam, if he didn't stipulate, V'nimtzu Aleh Nidarim, so now we're going to assume that the Kiddushin is valid because he didn't stipulate and set up a condition that she doesn't have Nidarim, is then Teitze Shelo B'Ksuba, meaning she needs a get if she wants to get married. The Kiddushin is valid, but she does forfeit her Ksuba. Now, it's the fact that he didn't know and she didn't notify him that she has these Nidarim, that's valid justification for divorcing a woman without having to pay her Ksuba. The same din applies to Mumin. A man marries a woman, almanasha ein oleh mumin, she has no physical blemishes. V'nimtzu sheyesh ba mumin ein mekudeshes. The Tanai was not fulfilled, but konsa stam, he didn't stipulate that explicitly. V'nimtzu sheyesh ba mumin teitzei shelo b'ksuba. She needs a get because the Kiddushin is valid. A man doesn't want to be married to a woman who's got mumin, so therefore she loses her ksuba by virtue of the fact that she didn't notify him that she has mum. Then the Mishnah already goes off on a little bit of a tangent to establish what mumin are relevant to Kiddushin. Kol ha-mumin ha-posla b'kohanim. And for this we have to know a Gemara Masechet Ksubis. The Gemara there goes through a list of mumin that are common to both Kohanim that passel him for Migdash, Avodah b'Migdash, and they passel her for Nashim. However, the original source is not in Ksubis. The Gemara in Ksubis actually expands it. The original source is Bechoros in the 7th Perek, where the Mishnah enumerates all the psulim that disqualify a Kohen. And if you read our Mishnah, you get the impression that other mumin that would not disqualify, they're not on the list enumerated in Bechoros, would not undermine the Kiddushin or would not require that she lose her ksuba. However, in the Masechet Ksuba Daf Ayin Hey, they added another 8 mumim that are posel b'noshim afal pisha ein posel b'kohen. The Mishnah indicates that everything depends upon whether or not he stipulated or he didn't stipulate. Utnanami b'ksubas ki haigavna. We have a Mishnah in Ksubas on Daf Ayin Beis that we alluded to before, and that it's a little bit earlier than the Mishnah we would do. And there it says exactly what it says here. A carbon copy of our Mishnah here, and the Gemara answers, Hacha b'Kiddushin itzruchle, Tana Ksubas atu Kiddushin, Hasam Ksubas itzruchle, v'Tana Kiddushin atu Ksubas. Once our Mishnah mentions the law in Kiddushin, it already teaches us the identical law in Ksuba. And once the Mishnah in Ksubas teaches us the law in Ksuba, then Agavurcha, he also teaches you the law in Kiddushin. And now we get to the next Mishnah. He says to two women, his kadshu li bepruta zu, which means that there's only a half a pruta for each one of the two women. Or a case where he's makadish only isha achas bepachos mishava pruta. Afal pisha shalach sivlonos, even if subsequently he sent gifts, subsequently meaning liachar mikan, after the Kiddushin, eina mekudeshes. Now we're on Daf Nunam and Beis. We don't say that, you know what, he knew that the Kiddushin was invalid because it was less than a Shava Pruta, and therefore he now sends Sivlonos as Kesef Kiddushin. No. Shemachmas Kiddushin Rishonim Sholach. He was under the mistaken impression that the original Kiddushin are valid, and when he sends Sivlonos, he's just sending a matana, and therefore she doesn't need a get, and we don't even say l'chumra that she's married.